My own experience was unplanned. I didn't grow up in a household where blue-collar trades were on display. I grew up in an academic kind of bohemian world. And when I became a ward of the state, when our family fell apart, I was in Western Pennsylvania, and I was surrounded by blue-collar people, Western Pennsylvania. If you've ever seen the film Deer Hunter, it's about that period of time where I was actually in that part of the country, and it's kind of the way it was. It still is, but so I was surrounded by guys who were competent manually, and I grew to respect them and try to live like them. I think there are two things that you can do. One is make friends with guys who have those skills and just talk about it with them. I think that you'll find they'll be pleased to know that somebody who maybe doesn't have that background is interested in this. We live in a world where often people foolishly look down on them because, smart people only work with their heads and everybody else works with their hands. That's kind of the false belief that many people have. Some of the brightest people I've come across are tradesmen. But I think you can do that. If you are trying to pick up skills when your children are small, of course, they won't know that you don't know what you're doing. And there's always YouTube videos. There are lots of things I've learned just watching YouTube videos. And so we live in a marvelous time when instruction manuals are almost unnecessary. Like I was trying to fix a fuse on my Jeep TJ, and had to go to YouTube to figure out where it was, and then figure out the crazy sort of convoluted way to get at the fuse. But anyway, there's lots of stuff out there to learn from, and then practice.
Great. More questions? Just raise your hand. All right, I got one. Chris, how do you keep your kids? I gave Jared that talk about keeping your children, and he did a marvelous job. But you, as an older man with grown children, and just hearing you talk today, and then some of the podcasts I've listened with you, and times you've come on my show, you have 3 kids. They love the Lord. So far, the grandkids are on track too. What are some practical things that you've done parentally?
Yeah, I think one is to make certain that you have a conversation going. Doesn't mean that the relationship with the kid isn't going through a difficult period. With each of the kids, there were bumps and things we had to kind of work through. But you're the father. You should be up for dealing with the disappointments and the things that go with working with any other human being. You're going to have that kind of stuff. So you just need to keep that in mind and be know how to take a punch, that kind of thing. And then I think if you can communicate to your children that the standards are objective and that everybody is subject to them, including you, that goes a long way toward them understanding that the standards are just simply true. So, if I found myself in a situation where I had behaved foolishly or had not been fair or whatever, I would apologize. I think a lot of times fathers are afraid that's going to undermine their authority. Now, if you're an adult and you're always having to apologize, yeah, that will undermine your authority. But if the only person in the room who doesn't know you're wrong is you, then that really does harm your authority, because now you're the person that everybody is sort of rolling their eyes over behind your back. So you need to be quick to acknowledge when you are in the wrong, and then do whatever has to be done to make certain that the standard is secure and respected, and that through that you're demonstrating your respect for it. And then obviously, I think self-mastery is huge. I think that you shouldn't ever entertain the idea that you can exercise a mastery with your children if you can't master your own emotions and your own mind, because the kids will know that you're a hypocrite.
Jared, your kids are older than mine. What are some of the things you're doing to help keep your kids practically, parental stuff?
Maybe a word on the kingly dimension. So you have the prophet, priest, king thing. There is some government that comes into play. Maybe two ideas. First, thinking of what Chris said about working with your sons particularly, I do think that's more important than we realize. And it's also going to look very different depending upon your circumstances. So this is a little bit of biographical here, but I moved over the last 2 years. We have 7 children. My oldest is 14 now, youngest is 3. And 2 years ago, we bought in Florida not 2 years ago, I guess 4 years ago now. In Florida, we bought a big fixer-upper house. Had tons of trees in the backyard that needed to be cut down, like huge pine trees, burn pile. I mean, it was perfect. So all the things Chris says, I struggle sometimes because I'm like, boy, 3 years ago, I was on that. We had space. We had all kinds of things that needed to be fixed. Our home was incorporated into our life, like as an actual project. So they weren't even like annoying things. Usually when something breaks in the house, you're annoyed by it and it's an interruption. No, this was just like a part of our lives. So it was this fully integrated thing. And I have 4 boys, and we could cut down trees together, haul, we could work on faucets and all that kind of stuff. Now that situation is very, very different. We're city dwellers, right? They have a very robust classical Christian school experience. They're involved in sports. And I'm having to, when it comes to those mid-grade things, I'm having to call people to fix things because I don't have time to do them. So even hearing Chris again, anytime I listen to some of the things Chris says, I'm like, I've got to do this. We have to have some dad-daughter time where we're actually doing a project together. And so ensure that whatever the structure of your life looks like, it might look, if you're homeschoolers and you have some property, then that's going to be way up. But even if you're not, you have to find out ways to make sure that you're actually demonstrating to them how you are facing these various challenges. It really is learned. Like they're going to learn when you hit your thumb, what do you do? They're going to watch you, and it's going to have to be, what do you not do? It's going to be very life on life kind of thing. And then with their education and with their physical activity and sports. So governing your lives so you have that time together. Also governing to make sure that you're making the sacrifices necessary for them to succeed. I thought Chris's point on prayer was really, really demonstrative. Pray that they would win and that they would excel. And then you're shepherding them. You're watching right now, not just big abstract promises, but right now, what do they need? Well, that child needs to learn how to control his emotions more, right? Well, this child needs to learn how to stop being so lazy. And so there's encouragement, prophetic work. There's also kingly work, where you're actually going to structure it in such a way that they're positioned to win. And then the priestly work of saying, God, bless that. And then share that with your wife, like talk about that. So have a date night worked in or something where you have some time and you're talking about that in such a way that it's not just pent-up anxiety, like why does he keep making that mistake or she keep making that mistake? You're actually talking about it. When you hear about it, then you pray about it, and just work with the Lord to watch him answer those prayers.
That's really helpful. It makes me think of like what you were saying, the kingly, prophetic, kingly, and priestly. That's a priestly praying, God bless my kids in this endeavor in this way. The prophetic is instruction and preaching to your children, preaching gospel and law. But the kingly aspect, I feel like, is one that has been neglected, especially by Reformed folks. When I was in Acts 29 for a while, I ended up growing resentful towards Kuyperianism, because Kuyperian just became a synonym for social justice woke, because that's what it is in Acts 29. Yeah, sure, we're Kuyperian. But it's not all of Christ for all of life. It's all of Marx for all of life. And so I, realizing that it was the two kingdom guys who were more conservative, And so I was like, well, then that must be the right position. So then I kind of just started doing and exploring some of that. And then I realized, oh, you know what? It's still good. All of Christ for all of life, every realm, every sphere. It just needs to actually be Christ and not Karl Marx. And so then I came back and Doug Wilson was obviously a big inspiration in that regard. And I started thinking about grown children who had gone astray and looking at some fathers. And so I'm going to get a little bit particular here, but I'll do my best to be respectful. But I was thinking about Abraham Piper. And thinking about, it's not just like, oh, he's not serving the Lord, but he's blaspheming Christ to 1 million TikTok followers, and 100% writing off of his father's name. Like Abraham Piper, it's not like he's a genius or uniquely gifted or would accrue that big of a platform on his own merit. So it's a mockery of his father and a blasphemy of Christ, and really a shame. And I don't know John Piper. I don't know his private parenting. And from what I can tell, John Piper is going to be in heaven. He'll have probably a closer seat to Christ than me, and he seems like, in a lot of ways, like a stand-up guy. But I did think, and this is speculation, so I want to give that disclaimer. I have no idea what happened in the particular sense in the Piper home. I'm sure in many regards it was godly. But I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about Doug Wilson, and I was thinking about Nate, who I've had a little bit of I got to meet him in person one time, and but it just seems like Doug was okay with Nate, very much okay with Nate just. Like, Dad, I think what I want to do is something with dragons, like video games or writing or whatever it is. This creative, like, what I'm getting at is not vocational ministry, not going to be a pastor. Whereas, again, it's speculation. I don't know what went on in the Piper home, but I could imagine just from a distance looking in, and so I could be ignorant and working with pieces of the information, but. If I was looking in, from the outside looking in, I would feel like if I was John Piper's son, there wouldn't be much for me other than vocational ministry. That would kind of be the end all be all, and that anything outside of that would be, not that Piper would frown on it or anything like that, but I would feel just internally like I had settled for something less, I like that what you were saying, Chris. The settling, I guess I have to settle for academia, which in that case is beautiful because it's representing your daughter saying that motherhood is even higher than that, and that's right. But I would hate though a child feeling like I have to settle for something outside of vocational ministry because that is wrong. That's not settling. Vocational ministry is not the highest end all be all. And I remember seeing on Twitter with some guys who will remain unmentioned, but a few months ago where they posted a quote, or no, it wasn't even a quote. It was just the guy talking and saying, Pastor, as Christianity and politics has become more popular, he said, Pastor, do not quit your church, pastoring your church of 100 to be the mayor of a town of 100,000. Better to be a pastor of a church of 100 than be the mayor of 100,000. And I quote tweeted that individual and said, and mayor of 1,000, do not quit your vocation, being a mayor of a 1,000-person town, to be the pastor of a mega church of 10,000. Like, it works both ways. It depends on your vocation. And I just think we've gotten so into, we're pietists. Evangelicalism is marked by pietism, and I wonder how many kids, certainly God has to sovereignly work and convert and save their souls. That's first and foremost, grace and faith, like Jared. But I can't help but imagine how many kids, especially particularly boys, would be spared if their fathers could recognize the direction they were going and bless it.
Yeah, so I don't know John Piper, but I knew Doug. I think I'm having problems. I do know Doug, obviously, and pietism is the last thing that comes to my mind when I think Doug Wilson. And his kids love him. His grandchildren love him. His daughters and sons-in-law, they all love him. But the very first time I was out there, this is kind of a fun story. So I was brought out to speak at Grace Agenda. And I'd never met, Doug in person prior to that, never been with his family, but I was at this big family gathering, and Doug couldn't get a word in edgewise. It was just sort of like this, the scene, right? But but he was very amused by everything that was going on around him. He just kind of, but that's not, I think, what people who have no direct experience with Doug wouldn't necessarily assume. I think people who don't know the situation directly themselves are projecting upon Doug as things that are not true. Now, I know Nate, and I know something about the background there, and Nate is a really interesting guy. He's very talented, and I think that, I've not talked to Doug directly about this, but my guess is that your read is completely right, that there is a kind of family mission that they have that they've received from Doug's father, Jim, who I had the opportunity to get to know a little bit. And all the kids have bought into it. All the kids have bought into it. But how they work it out is quite, it's quite open because of this reformed understanding that every vocation is a means by which you glorify God.
Yeah, when it comes to the American Christian landscape, you have, say, maybe the non-reformed evangelifish world is full of handing your kids over to the state to be educated, egalitarianism, all that nonsense. But then when you come into the reformed American Christian world, I would say where you have headship, complementarianism, patriarchy, something like that, they know, this reform group knows that that's wrong. So let's look at ourselves for a minute. I would say that the reformed world, if they're erring, are erring on the side of fathers that are going to be on some spectrum of heavy-handed. Okay, so the worst forms of that, but just a little bit of that, like the kids know the expectations, but it's kind of like sit straight, act right. Now I know that there's a kind of a loose reformed world that doesn't get it and needs more of the rod, right? But I do think there's this reformed vision, kind of picking up on what Chris said about Doug. There's a phrase that I found them using out in Moscow a lot: pull, don't push, and then left-handed power, which is kind of like priestly. Okay, right-handed is this what I said, do what I said, and left-handed is where you see something wrong with the people that are under your command, and you don't even say anything about it. You don't send those subtle signals, that passive-aggressive signals. You don't do any of that. They literally probably don't know where you're at on the issue that's happening in the room, but you pray, and all of a sudden, boop, Now, if somebody's burning the house down, then make sure they stop burning the house down. But it's those little things where the children feel the freedom to be, to live, to go, to risk, to do, like, go for it. So the whole world is wide open to you, like take off, and there's a freedom there that turns the hearts of the fathers to the children and the hearts of the children to their fathers. So when you're leading your home, you want your home to be like a fun place to be. Okay, so, and Chris said great stuff about happiness and not knowing how to define happiness. Is the joy of the Lord present in the home? Right? Is mom snapping at the children all the time? Then people aren't going to want to be around there. Is dad always kind of dropping the iron hammer? People aren't going to want to be around there. But is it a place where it's going to be so hard for me to turn my back on dad because dad tangibly blessed me over and over and over and over again. I see all the ways that he poured himself out, leaders eat last kind of thing, and we got these blessings that we didn't deserve. So there's a vision of what you're aiming at.
Great. I saw a hand in the back. Let's do the far back. Right there, black shirt, far back.
Well, in the case of my second son at United Steel, he got the job there because one of the elders of my church used to be a foreman there, and it's a family-held business. So it's got about 300 employees, but it's still very much a family firm. So he's not in, say, corporate America in the way that I think we all can imagine. But I do think that those who do find themselves in corporate America, my encouragement to them is not necessarily to pull up stakes and try to go someplace. You might really be the Daniel or the Joseph. And I've had guys I've worked with over the years who've had really a positive influence on the corporations that they've been in and have become kind of, counselors and mentors to others in those places, and even kind of advocates for other people. But I do think that just at a practical level, you need to have your plan B ready, because there is no such thing as a safe, secure job with benefits. That's a myth. Any corporation, the last guy to get fired is the owner, right? So just be prepared. I mean, it may be very sad to let you go. It's not like it's just dog eat dog, but you do need to just be, the kind of the thing that was the real eye opener for me was my father-in-law was an engineer with United Technologies, which is an enormous corporation, owns Pratt and Whitney, lots of very large industrial businesses, enterprises on the East Coast. And he was like a lot of guys in the 1950s who believed a safe, secure job with benefits was the way to go. And then in 1992, I think it was, he was a victim of the first, big layoff sort of wave. And then he was hired back as a consultant at a lower rate and no benefits. So, it just devastated him. He had no plan B. And it's understandable. No one was encouraging him to think in those terms. And I do think everybody ought to have a plan B if you find yourself in corporate America. Okay, well, one of the things about strengths is that generally kids who have strengths have a kind of a positive feedback loop, because they're obviously doing something that they tend to have some ability to do. And then they're getting some kind of, reinforcement, either because they've done a good job and they know it, or they're getting other people who praise them for what they've done. So that's a really positive thing. In terms of weaknesses, I think that, we all have weaknesses, and I try to get my kids to play to their strengths, understanding that you don't want moral weaknesses. Moral weaknesses have to be addressed. But in terms of weaknesses of maybe competence or ability, those can be, we just kind of think, we can't all be great at everything, and just encourage kids to pursue the things that they're going to shine in. The thing with my kids is they were all pretty self-motivated, so in many respects, they made my life easy. Yeah, sure, that's right. Sure. Well, basically, there's the carrot and the stick, and you try to work with that. I think too, though, if you can, and then I think there are also kind of periods of life where a kid is going through a period of life, and then when that period is ended, they're almost like a new person, and it's hard when you're in the moment to know that happens a lot. So with my children, there were these sort of periods of great concern. With my boys, I just regular conversation with my wife at the end of the day would be, it's going to be all right. Don't worry about it. I know what's going on now, even though it completely perplexes you. I think I understand what's happening here. Now I might not actually know. But I would say to my wife, hey, babe, you're actually being counterproductive right now. The more you lay it on, the worse it's going to get. So let up. So I'd coach my wife a little bit on the male mindset when the boys weren't in the room. Never correct your wife when the kids are around. Always do that. And likewise, wives, same with your husband. If you've got something that concerns you about the behavior of your husband or your wife, that you think is counterproductive, that's a good conversation for another time, But when both kids are in the room, it's time for united forces, because kids have a real sense of what the sort of the window of opportunity. It is okay, I'm going to side with dad right now. I'm going to side with mom against, how it works,
on motivation, one of the things is sometimes parents have this false expectation that we're going to have like Pauline self-control at 7. You know, aren't you better at this? The hand of the diligent shall rule, son. Well, yes, he shall, but I am also 8 years old. So what parents have to do is actually the governing thing for both your boys and girls. Put them in a hard sport, like put them in a very hard sport. Now, if you're homeschool and you're way off the reservation kind of thing, if you're way out, then manual labor, and for the daughter, following mom, doing that hard work, early morning rising, making breakfast for the family, that can do it. But if you're not in that kind of situation where you're in close access to some kind of sport, do it. For the boys, do it. Get them in there. They need to get hit. They need to know what it feels like to get hit. They need to get back up. They need to sweat. They need to. Pastor Wilson said this recently. He's like, there's some lessons that boys can't learn unless they're throwing up on the sidelines. That's just. You can tell them all you want. You can look them right in the face and be, son, life's hard. He doesn't understand what you're saying. He doesn't understand. If he's throwing up, then he'll understand. So you have to do it. You can't build that practical virtue that Chris was talking about and that martial virtue. I don't think it can be built without a lot of blood and sweat, particularly for your sons. And I think you need to lean on your daughters that way too. Being a woman, I mean, look at that Proverbs 31 woman. That strength has to be cultivated through very practical means.
So this is kind of fun to reflect on because I did spend time with my oldest son, coaching some of his teams and stuff. So he was on the town traveling team for baseball. That was a lot of fun. There was a lot of fun stuff with that. But I played collegiate soccer, so I was in Division III. And so when it came time to, get involved in different things, soccer was one of the options. So my son was on a soccer team. One of the things that you saw with this is that the role of a coach is really important, but one of the other problems is other parents and what they're coming to the sport with in mind for their kid. I remember, one of the things is when you move from T-ball, which is like everybody gets a trophy kind of thing, to actually winning and losing, and then winning and losing really big. It's really kind of freaky, the kind of behavior that you see with people. But that's just, I agree with you completely, but that's another sort of wrinkle to this. I remember one time I had a young man, we had a competitive team. This was soccer. This was a high school soccer team. I was a coach, and I had a young man that I needed to play a particular position, and he didn't want to do it because it wouldn't be fun. And so I just informed him that his fun was not the objective. Winning was what we were concerned with. And then his father took the kid's side. And I said to the father, I said, what do you think this is all about? When does your son learn to make a sacrifice? He said, well, this is supposed to be his fun years. I was like, no, this is not supposed to be exclusive fun time. This is where he learns some important lessons that he's going to have to hopefully take the benefit of into the rest of his life. And one of those is sometimes you do things that are not fun, but just need to be done. So this is a great learning opportunity. Father never got the message. The kid, by the way, didn't turn out very good. Well, you need to follow my friend Aaron Wren. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Yeah. Yeah. So Aaron and I go back a long way. It's fun. The first time Aaron and I got together, was when he was still at the Manhattan Institute in New York, and we had lunch right across the street from Penn Station because the Manhattan Institute was located there. And it was like 3 hours later, I said, don't you have to go to work? But anyway, he has a lot of really great things to say about those subjects. But when it comes to servant leadership, what do we mean by that? I think sometimes we place the accent on the wrong word. leadership is where the accent should be placed. Okay, first of all, we're going to be going somewhere, and there's some authority I'm going to exercise in order to provide the leadership here. And it's in your best interest, by the way. You might not understand that best interest. I might need to teach you what's in your best interest. That's why I serve you, because you're an idiot. You don't know anything. Listen, boy, this is what good is. It's kind of a fun story. When I was a little kid, I didn't like pecan pie. Why? Because I had tasted it? No, because I hadn't. I just looked gross. It looked like a bunch of roaches in a big soup. And so I was like, I don't want that. And my father would look at me and say, boy, you don't know what good is. I'll eat your pie. And he would just eat it in front of me. I was like, ooh. Then I actually tasted it one day, and I realized that I'd been schnookered my entire life.
It's the same thing. Which word gets the emphasis? So do you serve by leading, or do you lead by serving? So most of the evangelical world thinks it's the latter, so that it's not that you serve by leadership, but your leading is by serving. And in my experience, pastorally, not so much here with this church by God's grace, but in the past, due to my own immaturity, and in my own immaturity, the type of people that I attracted, it was instead of my leadership is my act of service, my service to this household, to this crew, to this woman is my leadership, faithful leadership. Instead of that, it was I lead by serving, and leading by serving. I can define it for you very simple. It means not leading, always. The guy who's like, well, I'm leading my wife by serving. He's not leading his wife, always. Every conversation, every pastoral counseling meeting, at the end of the day, what it always got down to, the bottom line, the guys who were, I'm leading through my service, they just weren't leading. And what that really meant is I'm using, so Ephesians 5, Christ, he laid his life down for the church. But how that got defined was a husband laying down his life, his prerogatives, even his good sense, his common sense, his convictions, his theology, everything. Laying it all down, things that you're not actually supposed to be laying down. And it wasn't laying it down for the good of the wife, for her salvation, her sanctification, her preservation, protection, provision. It was laying it down for her personal preferences. So it was that's how it ended up getting defined was, husband, you lay down your biblical patriarchy theology for your wife's preference that tonight she wants to go to this particular restaurant. At the end of the day, you press Gospel Coalition, and that's what they mean. You press them. What they mean is, husband, it's not husband, lay down your preferences for your wife's eternal good. It's husband, lay down your desire for your wife's eternal good, and anything else for that matter, for her preferences. Even Driscoll back in the day, Aaron Wren brings this up, but he'd rail on men. But at the end of the day, it's ironically it was feminism. So it's like, men, you should work hard and do this and blah blah blah. And but when it really came down to it, the applications was, you should be willing to do all these things and work 1 million hours a week and and provide and blah 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 and lay down all your desires, all your preferences. She always gets to pick the activity, always gets to pick the restaurant. Notice none of those are needs. They're not eternal salvific sanctification needs. It's just her wants, her wants, her wants, her wants, her wants. You lay down, and it's not even you laying down your wants for her wants. It's you laying down her needs for her wants. You laying down, even when she needs something that doesn't align with her wants, you pick her wants over. So really, the counsel is hate your wife. Whereas Ephesians 5 is that Christ loved his bride and gave him so. But what you're actually encouraged to do is to hate your wife by giving her what she wants over her needs. We apply that to parenting. Any other scenario, right? We want to say, well, the child is 5 and they want candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that they need vegetables, but they want candy, and if you love them, you will give up your preference for your child to eat broccoli so that your child can have their desire, which is to eat candy. Well, we would all just say that that's abusive parenting. But apply it to the husband-wife relationship, and it's totally fine. And when I say it's totally fine, I'm talking, I'm not talking about heretics. I'm talking about evangelicals. I'm talking about reform guys. They would say, not only is it totally fine to do anything else, is you are an abusive man, you're a cult leader, and we are going to rally as much as we can. Social media attacks, hit pieces will be written. Doug Wilson is a cult leader. This person's a cult leader. That person's, so why are they people, you said the last part of your question, they're flocking towards, Jocko, or Andrew Tate or whatever. Well, that's the bad solution. It's the wrong solution. But I think they're flocking there because, there's a couple things, but I'll end on this. I think right now what you have happening is you have certain individuals who are, they're complementarian, maybe even strong complementarian, broad complementarian, almost patriarchal, or they just don't like the word or whatever, and they're busting the Gandalf move, right? So they're in the middle, and that you shall not pass, and so they're standing. I'm just gonna stand up. They're like, if here's the bridge, and here's the weak gods, thinking of like R.R. Reno, the weak gods, and so that would include all the universal inclusive kind of stuff, the DEI, so the egalitarianism, feminism, and here's the strong gods, lowercase g gods, not like Thor, but the strong gods, like patriarchy would be one, nationalism would be one, faith, tradition, all those kinds of things, family. Here are the strong gods, and you've got these evangelicals, and they don't know what time it is, and they're saying, you shall not pass. And I think right now, like the sons of Issachar, what they would say is, no, we need to go from feminism back to patriarchy, and we will. Whether the evangelicals like it or not, feminism has failed so spectacularly. There's going to be a rubber band backlash moment where it's boom, all the way back to patriarchy. And then it's just the old adage, the Rushdoony adage of it's not whether but which. So you're going to get Andrew Tate patriarchy, Islamic patriarchy, pagan patriarchy, or Christian patriarchy, biblical patriarchy. There will be a return to nationalism. You can have Third Reich nationalism, right? Or you can have Christian nationalism. But this strategy of I'm going to stand in the middle and say no nationalism, no patriarchy, no this, no that, just middle, 1988 complementarianism, a word that's been invented, it's existed for 15 minutes, that middle, that third way, that middle ground. These guys are, they have rendered themselves completely impotent and irrelevant. They're a joke. No one will remember their name. No one. Whereas other guys who are mocked right now, 100 years from now, people will remember them. The same way that we are today. We remember guys who we would excommunicate if they were members in our churches today. Because we all admire courage. The thing is, we want courage to be safely buried under 6 feet of dirt. Then we'll admire it. So what I would say is get right there next to Andrew Tate and outman him in every way. And say, here's how he's right. Here's also how he's a fool. The red pill movement, they know what time it is, but they have no solutions. So say, you know what? And that's the beauty of the Calvinism post-mill combo, right? There's your red pill, Calvinism, total depravity, things are bad. Post-mill, Gandalf is going to come over this hill here in a moment, and we're going to win. We're not just going to black pill like Theoden and Rohan. We can win. So.
Let me connect what you said back to something you said, and then I'll answer your question. Because this fatherlessness issue, that's why the Andrew Tate thing, right? And we need to be able to laugh at some things. I just saw somebody tweet that Andrew Tate said something like, I hate food. I hate being hungry. I was like, why would people look to a guy for masculinity that acts like a 14-year-old girl? Like, who wants to be in high school? Like, I hate food. I hate it. I hate feeling full. I'm like...
That was part of the tweet. I hate feeling full.
It's like so ridiculous. I'm like, this stuff is so absolutely ridiculous.
I didn't imagine a 14-year-old girl. I was imagining Ben Stiller from... what's the movie? Zoolander. Yeah. That's what I was... Yeah.
Okay.
It's a great way to lose a few... Matilda. It's no big deal. It's a great way to lose a few pounds before a show. Believe me.
So... I'm just underscoring how bad the situation is. Like that such a fake, fabricated, ridiculous version of masculinity could be at all looked to as the real deal. Okay, so we do have a massive problem. But your question is interesting. What do you do? You mentioned a lot of fathers would be dispensationalists, that kind of thing. And it's going to start by honoring them. this is the way. This is the way forward. If you are a post-mill, covenantally minded, theonomic, et cetera, patriarchal kind of person that's understanding the family, the first thing you do is honor your father. And you, if you had a father that took you to church, I mean, wow. Praise the Lord, right? Cover up his weaknesses. You don't have to act like they're not there. Identify them. Try not to emulate them in their weaknesses, but you cover them up, and you find the things that they did that were good, and you praise them. I mean, praise the Lord for this grace. I remember as some of the covenantal things began to dawn on me, I was just absolutely struck by the heritage of Christianity. Whatever the stripe is. So whatever the stripe is, what you want to do is raise your children, raise your sons and daughters to say, let me tell you about your grandfather, if he's not around. Let me tell you about your grandfather who loved the Lord and worshiped the Lord every day of his life. Right? Schofield Bible in hand. Oh boy. But that thing was worn out, though. It was worn out. Or your great grandfather. Point to this Christian heritage, and begin by honoring them. So that would be at least a starting point.
Yeah, related to that, I got to know Jim Wilson a little bit. Jim never came around to the Reformed position. And I remember being in a meeting one time with Doug, and he said, I'll be back in about half an hour. I've got to put my father to bed. He would literally go home, pick up his father on his back, and carry him into his bedroom and put him down for the night. And I saw that kind of thing, often enough there in that environment to be deeply taken by it. So Doug honored his father in a number of ways, but it wasn't because his father had come around. It's kind of an interesting kind of feature to this. Yeah, I think that it depends on the nature of the mistake and who is affected. So if, let's say, maybe you were heavy-handed in the discipline of a son, which is something I was guilty of, you go to that boy and talk to him about it. Don't necessarily make a big house meeting. We're going to have a big house meeting here so I can say I'm sorry to Caleb or something like that. So I, try to keep short accounts with different members of the family. Now, let's say maybe you've made a mistake in terms of vocation or something that affects the house's financial well-being or something like that. I don't know if you need to apologize for anything. We all have setbacks. We all, things don't always work out the way we thought they would. You made the best decision you could under the circumstances with the information you had, and it didn't work. Okay, it was time for us to pull together and try to do the best we can to make this, transition or whatever you're in at that point. Now, at the same time, if it's something like that, then it's great to have a plan B. So one of the things I would always try to do is think about what's the worst case scenario. Can I live with that? Can the people I care for live with that? And so I'd have a set of things that I would have as sort of plans of action in case things didn't work out the way I hoped they would. And so sometimes you're actually working through that and no one knows it. I'm actually working on plan C right now. You don't need to announce it. You just kind of just do it. I don't know if that's helpful. I can just tell you what I did, which was there's been a practice that I've had over the years, and it's not as though I've been completely faithful to it, and there have been periods where I've been really on task, and then there have been periods where, because of one thing or another, I've not. But every day I would go out during my prayer time, and I would pray through, the members of my family. Pray for my wife, pray for my kids. Now I'm praying for my spouse, their spouses now. But years before they even had spouses, I was praying for their spouses. praying for their children, praying for my grandchildren. Still, now I actually have grandchildren to pray for and names for the spouses. But I did that kind of thing. When it came to periods where I was concerned about their obedience and where they were spiritually, there would be periods of fasting and prayer. I wouldn't necessarily let them know I was engaged in those things. Like I said, I didn't want to put them on some kind of guilt trip or anything like that. I just wanted to do it. But those are the things I did.
You got anything with that, Jared?
Yeah. Prayer. So I bless the children before they go to sleep.
Oh yeah. That was I did that.
Hand on head. May the Lord bless you, keep you. May your children possess the gates of their enemies. And amen. Good night. Lights out. So something like that. And then I would just say that particular priestly dimension. I mean, family worship, developing a robust psalm singing culture. On a Sabbath dinner or something like that, breaking out a psalm and singing, anything that's going to be in that priestly function. And then just carrying that idea around, knowing that that's what you are in everything you're doing. So if Romans tells us to offer up our bodies as living and holy sacrifices, in everything you're doing it like that. So are you really going to sin? You're going to give into those temptations, knowing that you are not just you, but you are the head of this household in a priestly function. So seeking to walk in holiness and asking the Lord to bless all that to the generations.
One of the things is kids really love traditions, and it's you're sick and tired of it, but they just want it. Do we have to do this again? That kind of thing's how you're feeling. But when it comes to blessing your children, praying for your children, laying your hands on their heads and praying for them as a father, I think that communicates. And then there are lots of fun things. And I remember I had a tradition where Christmas would not come until I drank from the Santa mug. And they completely went along with it. It was like I really had the power over Christmas. No Christmas for you this year. But anyway, it was about the family traditions, and your priestly office, being there to provide an environment in which they belong, they feel secure, they are going through kind of a pattern that they understand and have heard many times before. That's all a lot of fun and great.
Yes, liturgy, priestly liturgy. And so that's on a weekly basis. We do a Sabbath dinner on Saturday night, and I think seeing that something like that happens can really ingrain things. We celebrate Advent, so that kind of thing. Thanksgiving, what's it going to be like? So that takes a lot of time and investment and conversation with your wife. What are we going to do? How being willing to fund those things, knowing that there's going to be sacrificial investment to create this liturgical flow to the day, to the week, and to the year.
Yeah, we do Sabbath dinner on Saturday night with our family. We usually invite one other family from the church over to join us, and we'll, depending on the family, we'll usually ask ahead of time the family that's going to join us as guests. Assuming that they're okay with it, we'll do like a little bit of wine for our children and talk about celebrating the Lord's Day. And so wine is a celebration. We're ushering in the Lord's Day, and doing those kinds of things has been helpful. And then our church has like a potluck meal that we do on Sunday. So that's Saturday, Sunday. So the whole church is doing that. We do that as a part of our Sunday evening service. But I think, having like a calendar, a rhythm for us, the one rhythm that I just, and I know it's unhelpful, but there's a sense in which if the Advent season is stretched too far, it undoes itself, and I'm aware. But Christmas begins November 1st for us because we can't wait. So we have 2 months of decorations, Christmas songs, and I understand it's unhelpful. It really, it's not in line with the calendar, and I know that the calendar is correct, and I'm wrong, but we just can't wait all the way till December. So, other questions, Sam?
Yeah, that's a great question. Storytelling was a big part of our family sort of practice. So I write stories, so that makes things a little different than maybe most people in terms of their experience. So a couple things I would do, and then I'll get to your question about medium. One of the things is at the dinner table, sometimes I would have the kids make a story. So we'd sit in a circle, and I'd say, okay, here's the main character, the protagonist. Her name is Maggie, okay? And she's at the bottom of a hole, okay? And then I turn to my child on my right. Then what happens? And then, the child has to make up something on the spot, and then the next child gets a turn. And then you end up with this absolutely nonsensical, stupid story, of course. But everybody's engaged in making the story, and so it's getting them thinking, making them, think in terms of, character, plot, all that kind of stuff. That was fun. The other thing I'd do is I would tell my story. I tell my kids stories every night before bed, and I'd say a good half of the time that I was making them up on the spot, extemporaneous. And so there were the Iguana brothers, Igor and Iggy. So I'd tell the stories about their adventures to my sons. And then my daughter, I created a character called Daisy because she couldn't handle narrative tension. Everything had to be rainbows and butterflies all the time. So I actually made a story up on the spot that when I was done, I thought, that's pretty good. I think I can do something with this. So I've been working on the story. It's actually a picture book that's going to be coming out here in the next couple of years. But I've been working on it forever. And there's a whole story behind that. But anyway, I think storytelling is important. And I think that if you can, if you put books and verbal storytelling as sort of the lead thing, then the other stuff is more or less kind of secondary in the household. So we always had tons of books. So even my son, the blacksmith and welder, he takes Russian literature to lunch to read, at work. He's reading like War and Peace, for goodness sake. I'm like sitting with my kids and they're like reading this stuff that I'm not interested in at all. But they're talking about comparing notes about Dostoevsky and whatever. But lots of books. And then when it came to media, my main message was every medium can have a positive use. So we're not like avoiding the internet entirely. But we have to be aware that there are temptations that are often associated with or kind of come with the territory. So making sure that we're the master of the medium and not the other way around is the key. I remember with my second son, again, a lot of stories about Gabe, but he really got into video games for a while. I was getting a little bit concerned about it. And then one day he just stopped. And we were driving somewhere, and I hadn't really talked to him about it, but we went by one of these places that was all about virtual reality, kind of full immersion kind of thing. I pointed it out to him. He said, I'm not into that anymore. And he said, I want to master the real world. That was the thing.
Wow. All right. Well, let's go ahead and pause here and let's let Chris not be late for his plane. Can we give a warm thank you for Pastor Chris Wiley?